intro thing today, guys. It's I I got nothing to say. I do the intro thing when I have something to say that is significant to the theme of the episode, or it's relevant to some of the thoughts that this episode provokes, or something along those lines. This episode provokes in me thoughts of, hey, this was an episode of a standard Star Trek show, which I guess is kind of thought provoking in its own right, and it's actually what I'm going to start talking about to begin with, because I want to lament the state that Star Trek had kind of been stuck in. It was kind of in a rut of what I tend to call old television. Now, don't mistake me this as an automatic derogatory nature towards old television. There's plenty of old television that's actually quite good. And indeed, so there's some really old television that's even quite good. I'm one of those people who like several episodes of the original Twilight Zone and Old Who. The second Doctor, Troughton, being one of my favorite doctors, is just an example of that. So don't mistake this from some kind of elitism. But what I mean by that is, in the older days, especially with a television show that's basically like this, an episodic thing, you're going to see the same cast every week. And that may sound weird, but the reality of the situation is, well, okay, let me just lay it out for you, right? Let me pull up a couple things here. I actually have some notes I want to read from specifically, including that one. Big old paragraph. Okay. If this were a modern show, this whole thing would have had much more tension for me as a viewer, and I can go and elaborate on why very simply. Tom Paris, something might have happened to Tom Paris. When I was watching this, I've been talking about this in the past several episodes as I've been going through. It has never once occurred to me, not even for a second, that Tom was dying or leaving the ship or anything like that. I was curious what they were going with it. I was curious what they were doing with it. My biggest theory at the time, I still remember this because I used to have discussions with my mom. She was also, she's who got me into Star Trek. Let's just put it that way. But we had discussions. What's going on with Tom Paris? Alien in possession. Is this some kind of a plot? Is he secretly leading into, is he a traitor to the enemy or something like that? But the thing is, as we kept watching it, it never really occurred to us that this was some kind of major change as far as the character goes. Even when this episode came out and we find out Tom Paris is leaving the ship, it never even crossed our minds that it would stick. Because that's not how Star Trek did things. There were exceptions, but as that word implies, they were exceptions. The most Star Trek tended to do, now don't take this for derogatory, because the most Star Trek tended to do was major character development. After all, Jean-Luc Picard, to use a great example, was nowhere near the same character he was when he started the show. Neither was Data, neither was Geordi, neither was Worf. Look over on Deep Space Nine. Look at the difference between Kira, well, in the second episode, because she actually wasn't written as Kira until the second episode, and Kira 3 seasons later on. Completely different character for all intents and purposes. Look what happened with Sisko, So character development, that's something, even Voyager does actually have character development in the Doctor, is a good example of this, and in Tom Paris himself, and in 7 of 9 later on. But my lamentation here is that so much dramatic potential was missed because of a word, because of something I don't have a better word for, which is basically teasing. Now let me explain what I mean by that. I have a note here about it. I guess I don't really have anything else to say about it because it's just the note. One of the things I hate in fiction, and in real life too, admittedly, is when you tease up something and then don't pay off. Whether that means you don't do anything, or whether that means you're just going to have the expected result. Let me give you a weird example of what I'm talking about really quickly, okay? Those of you who follow World of Warcraft know that this big old thing about who's going to be the next war chief of the Horde once we take down Garrosh Hellscream. It was Vol'jin. Vol'jin was the obvious choice. Everyone guessed it was Vol'jin. And then they started teasing, well, Sylvanas is gaining up her power over here. And, Lor'thramar is becoming a true leader, and he's got all the makings of it. And there were some hintings about Cairn. And there was all this stuff, and it was like building up and teasing. And it was teasing because it wasn't satisfying. And then it was Vol'jin. Now, don't mistake me. I'm not against Vol'jin being the war chief. I'm against their approach to the storytelling. And I hate it when people do that. So teasing up this whole thing with Paris and with Michael Jonas, and then it's over. It's done. It was completely unsatisfying. And This is probably going to be a short episode, and I do apologize, but it's basically because this episode is just kind of dull. It's not satisfying. It's not interesting. I only have a few things to really comment on. I found myself getting weirded out because, like, normally when I'm watching an episode, I have to pause it really regularly to take notes and then unpause, pause. I found myself watching, I think I got like a 10-minute stretch of this episode without taking a single note because I just didn't have anything to say. It's like, okay. Yep. And then that happens, Yep, that happens too. I want to share a couple things, though, here. First and foremost, there... okay. The subplot with Michael Jonas and Tom Paris was the first real subplot. Well, I'm sorry, the second real subplot that Voyager ever did. And I only say that with a quote unquote because the Neelix was jealous subplot was the first one, and that barely counts. But this is the first actual subplot Voyager's really attempted. Now, it probably comes as no surprise to you, based on the last episode, which I mentioned the subplot kind of being a contentious thing, that in this episode they just chose to end it. It wasn't actually supposed to end here. It was supposed to keep going for a bit longer and leading into basics. And for those of you who've seen the series, you probably understand why. I don't want to spoil anything for those of you who haven't. I know some of you are watching the episodes with me, but suffice it to say, when you see basics, which is the season ender for this season, you'll understand why this subplot was probably supposed to extend to there, and then conclude with basics part 2, starting up season 3, which would have made a lot more sense thematically and in character and in general. But no, and I'm just going to quote this here, if I can find the exact quote. This is Jerry Taylor, someone who I just fling a lot of venom at in general. But, I mean, she's done some good work, but she has done some really bad stuff, too. Let's just get off topic here. By this time, she said, I was just frankly turned off to the whole idea of the Paris arc. I really thought it wasn't working, and so bringing it to a conclusion felt obligatory rather than challenging. I was much more interested in Neelix's newspaper, which I thought was fun. I think that just says it all right there. I mean, really, the first really big subplot that was supposed to be an arc carrying through the whole season, basically, or at least half the season, they dumped because they were just tired of it. Now, granted, she was only one person involved, but that was the general consensus. And I actually saw a makings of on this one, or in this season, I should say, where they talked about how they kept building it up, and then they just, like, apparently they just ran out of ideas on some part, and some people were just tired of it, like Jerry Taylor was, and they're just like, okay, fine. It was Michael Jonas in the end. Totally unsatisfying conclusion. Totally poor way of doing it. I'm going to go ahead and put my changes right here because I think this is where it's best noted. I'm not going to mention the obvious change, which is keep the subplot going. But there's a few details that would need to be smoothed out. First and foremost, let's talk about the intro to this episode. The teaser to the episode. A briefing with Neelix, where Neelix has this big old speech about his show, and then, you know, it ends with him finding a message from one of his Talaxian friends that one of the people from the crew is leaving. Cut to teaser, cut to intro, right? And then the next thing starts, and then there's this big thing as they try to figure out who it is, and then they find out it's Tom Paris. That whole thing, I would rework. First and foremost, a briefing with Neelix, you don't have to show the whole briefing. You just don't. I get that where they were going with it, and props to Ethan Phillips. According to Ethan Phillips, he had a hellacious time doing those scenes. He had a huge amount of material to rehearse in a day, and to memorize in a day, and there were no cuts. It was one long take for a huge chunk of time. So props to the man for pulling it off, but it just kind of didn't work, and it didn't work on several levels. Number one, anybody who's been following Voyager at all already knows Tom Paris is probably the guy leaving. That's not a shock. That's not a surprise. Number two, if you're going to build up that Tom is leaving, at least make that the build-up, not that someone's leaving. Because the moment we said someone's leaving, it's like, oh, Tom Paris is finally leaving the crew to do whatever he's doing. There was no tension. There was no teaser. There was nothing. It was completely just, yeah, okay. It was like someone coming up and dramatically, slowly revealing that water is wet! And then just waiting for you to react as you're standing there staring at them, waiting to hear the punchline, because they haven't... I'm sorry. I call this episode dull, but it's so frustrating because it is so pointless. I think that's probably the kindest thing I could say about this episode. It is pointless. Let's get back to my notes here. I've gotten too far off track because I'm just ranting now about how... Let's go ahead and talk about something. Okay, I got something to talk about here. This is actually something really pertinent to me. I do an amateur video show. You're watching it right now. Hi, I'm awesome that you're watching it. I really am. But that is me. I'm an amateur little show. I don't have a professional studio. I'm recording in my room with my computer right over there. I've got some nice new equipment. I've got some decent equipment, all things considered. But I'm just doing my own little thing. So I understand. And I have a great deal of sympathy and empathy for people who are starting that kind of thing. I also have a bit of a perspective on it because not only have I actually done professional recording in the past, back when I was actually working in television, but I've been doing this amateur recording for almost 3 years now. Now, I'm not saying, I'm the big man on the couch, but what I'm trying to say is, I think I can say with some degree of credence, I suppose, that I have some idea of what I'm doing. And Neelix and his approach to the thing is actually interesting to me because it's so deliberately designed to show that he didn't. But I want to give props, as weird as this sounds, because the way they portray him as an amateur, as someone who doesn't know what he's doing, is actually really well done. He pretty much hits all the classic mistakes. Not actually being aware of how to do his, how to present himself, and so having very awkward movements. He mentions the name of his show constantly. How many times do you hear me say, here on Arsha Guy's Ruminations? No. He constantly mentions the name of his show. He does a lot of upfronting. This is something writing in general and fan fiction in specific tends to be very bad about, where it's like, okay, here, no proper pacing, no proper tempo. They even comment on this in setting. Harry Kim makes a comment about that as well. So it was interesting to me that they actually did a good job of portraying that. And so don't mistake this for me bashing on Neelix. It's just funny because they did a good job of portraying an amateur show, but then we're left with the problem that they're portraying an amateur show, that's what we're watching. See the problem here? This has been true for forever, and I've commented on this a dozen times, I swear. Just because you're being deliberately irritating doesn't make it not irritating. It's like being really, really sexist to highlight how bad sexism is, but you're still being really sexist, or something like that. You get where I'm going with this. It's one of the problems I tend to have with some types of parody, basically, and that's where I'm going with this. This was intended to be kind of a parody on that sort of thing, but you don't parody something by doing it straight-faced. That's just, that's not funny. That's not interesting. Spaceballs, that was parody. And I could actually do a whole video series about Spaceballs, but I shouldn't talk about that because then people will ask about it. So I just wanted to comment on that. Let's talk about off-screen juggling. This is fascinating because I want to give this show credit. I want to, but I can't. Because the off-screen juggling thing was done for budget concerns on Voyager, the show, not on Neelix, the show. Neelix, the show, could have just gotten the guy and juggled and blah, 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 blah. And I want to say that, they were intentionally showing how pathetic he was by not showing the juggling, but that's not what actually happened. What happened is the Voyager show couldn't get a hold of, or afford, both really, a decent juggler to actually come on and do the scene. So they just had a guy who was obviously just on a mic voicing over in the background saying, "Oh, I'm coming over." And then they didn't have the juggling, and it was just, amidst this whole parody of an amateur show, that kind of a thing just kind of really it stung. And to this day, I tend to think of this as the no juggling off camera episode. I'm not even kidding. That's what I tend to think of Investigations as, because of how much that just stands out to me. All right. One other thing I do like about this episode, there's two big things I really like about this episode. One is the Doctor. Now, I know that's not a shock because he's the Doctor and Robert Picardo is awesome, but what I mean by that is we see another layer of his personality start to develop here, and this will be something that will very much come in later Voyager episodes when they actually and analyze this and go into depth in it. And that is, for lack of a better term, his ego. But I hesitate to say that because though he does certainly have an ego, and there is a great deal of negativity I could fling at that ego, the reality is the way he approaches that ego. Now, I'm going to save talking about this more extensively until later, but I just wanted to point out that they were already laying the groundwork for the Doctor's ego, and more importantly, why. Because it's not enough that he's just like, "Oh, I'm so super awesome." He's not, "Oh, I'm so super awesome," in a vacuum. He actually has reason and purpose why he's that way, and you can sort of see in him that desperate desire for attention, for adulation, for being recognized, for respect. Things that not only that he doesn't really get in general, except from maybe Kess, and that's it, but things he doesn't that he obviously is lacking, and something that has been an issue with his character arc since the beginning. He has gotten up to the point where the other crew members will actually talk to him and not treat him like a hypo spray. But that's only one step up. You see where I'm going with this. So I like what they did with that. I just wanted to mention that. Man, I just... Okay, there's an underlying plot thread of this episode about Neelix being a serious professional journalism, and he will determine everything, all that fun stuff, right? I'm not going to comment on that. I'm going to leave the topic of journalism, freedom of speech, and all that mess over there. I don't want to talk about it. You guys know that I don't like to talk about hot button issues unless I absolutely have to. And I talked about one in Life Signs because they examined it very carefully and with great detail and with great care, with great respect, I should say. This episode does not do that, and therefore I am not going to talk about that hot button topic because no. I also don't like to talk about that topic in general, but whatever. So, no comment on the journalism thing. Not going there. I want to read a quote for you. I know it's kind of long, but I want to read this for you to get across a point. Often Star Trek episodes, episodes in general, of television in general, will feel schizophrenic. You can feel where one scene or one chunk of dialogue was written by this writer, and then this one was written by this one. Much of this episode feels like it has the handprints of Jerry Taylor all over it, and I do mean that as a negative, but... Then there's some scenes which obviously have some other handprints on them, and I just want to read this. Okay, this is Neelix talking to his thing. Excuse me. Good morning, Voyager. I want to tell you about a friend of mine. I first met this man almost a year ago, and to tell you the truth, I didn't like him much. He seemed a little too cocky, a little too sure of himself. A lot of people had questions about him. He proved that he would sell himself off to the highest bidder, go wherever the wind blew. So people often wondered, can you trust this guy when the times got tough? Would he stand side by side with you? Or would he let you down when you needed him most? But the fact of the matter is, he proved himself right from the beginning. I wouldn't be alive right now if it wasn't for him, and the same goes for many of you. It took me a while to realize it. Like a lot of people, I was too caught up in first impressions to see the truth that was right in front of me. I overlooked his bravery because I was focused on his brashness. I ignored his courage because I saw it as arrogance, and I resented his friendliness because I took it for licentiousness. So while this man was giving us his best every minute of every day, I was busy judging him, and I am proud to say that despite my narrow-mindedness, Thomas Eugene Paris became my friend. I'm going to miss him. No more laughs over a game of pool, no more sitting up to the wee hours swapping stories, no more complaints about my cooking. Goodbye, Tom. I think I speak for more of us than you might imagine when I say you are going to leave an empty space when you go, and I hope you find what you're looking for. Now that's well written, and it's also well performed, and there's a nice little montage going on as he's performing it, which was pretty awesome, all things considered. So, the reason I mentioned that is two big reasons. Well, three. I wanted to just share it with you because it was an awesome scene. But I got a couple other reasons, too. Number one, because it's obvious that whoever was writing that was the person who was responsible for Tom Paris's character arc, for his character. There's a reason he's basically one of my favorite characters on the show, easily in the top three. And that is everything that paragraph said. It's true. He is basically that kind of a person. The chaotic good, I'm here to help, do what I have to do, loyal to the end, cares about people, will do it because it's the right thing to do kind of guy. He is loyal to a fault. He is friendly. He's intelligent. He's competent. And I liked that. And it's obvious that whoever wrote that was trying to get across the point that in-universe he was too. This wasn't just something that we, the viewers, were seeing, but that in-universe he was acknowledged as being someone who was all these things. And the second reason I wanted to bring this up is that itself shows how much potential was ruined by the way they did this. Because that feels like an actual appropriate eulogy for a character. That single, well, it's not a paragraph, it's like a half a page, but that chunk there is more than Tasha Yar got when she died. Now, granted, I don't really want to go into that. In fact, I didn't even mention it earlier because I didn't want to touch that mess if I didn't have to. The Tasha Yar death and leaving the scene is not only the exception, but it was a messed up situation to begin with. I'll talk about that when I get to TNG. Suffice it to say, she didn't get that much when she actually died. And this is just Tom leaving for half an episode. Not even half, like 20 minutes. And I'm back. But it's fascinating because, again, it feels like this is something that was going to be dragged out more. Imagine the potential if they had actually had Tom stay off the ship. If this had gone until basics. If we just didn't have Tom on Voyager in the next several episodes. If every now and again we'd catch up with him, either actually going to his perspective, which is possible, showing his life on the Talaxian ship, dealing with the Kazons, which would be also another way to flesh out not only the Talaxians in specific, but the setting in general, give us a little more scope and depth for the area. But on top of that, the next thing they'd be able to do with that, or rather the other way they would be able to do with that, is have them keep in touch, have members of the crew contact him every now and again on the comm just to keep up and hear what's been going on, which probably would have been a better way to do it, all things considered. And then, the episode before basics, find out, oh my gosh, the convoy was attacked by, blah, blah, blah. You see where I'm going with this? It would have been a lot better way to pull it off, in my opinion. I just have two quick comments here. Comment one. It's interesting that Tom Paris, or rather the actor playing him, deliberately uses a different tone when he's lying. I've actually commented on this before, and with regards to several other characters too, but he is obviously portraying himself differently when the character is lying and when he is not. And the difference is kind of striking, really. It's one of those things that it's not too obvious unless you're actually paying attention, in which case it's incredibly obvious. It's like, oh my God, it practically, I know I tend to pay attention to subtleties and details, mannerisms, word choice, that kind of thing. But ultimately, I really want to stress how wonderful the performance was and how well they did, good of a job they did with that. The other thing I wanted to comment on here is that I like that Paris went out of his way to give his whole speech to Neelix, specifically because he knew Neelix would then spread it to the entire crew. I've mentioned this before, because in several episodes Tom keeps going out of his way to publicly and openly show his discontent. This was the final thing. First he gets arrested, and then he tells Neelix, he's going to tell the entire crew, I'm leaving. It was the best possible way to get across that to whoever the spy was, that I am not content with Voyager, not alongside the Federation, and I'm out. So, again, a consummate professional right through that. Let's talk about Michael Jonas. Michael Jonas sabotages Voyager in this episode, technically twice, but I'm talking about the first one. He'd been slowly leaking something, technobabble. Point is, he was doing it fairly intelligently, all things considered, up until that point. But then the cracks start to show because it becomes more and more obvious that this was meant to last for a while, because all of a sudden he just kind of starts doing things and then he's caught, basically. And the only reason people don't realize it and he's not actually caught is because, TV characters tend to be stupid. And I'm sorry to put it that way, but that is the truth of it. And so, it's so obvious because it's like he had this big master plan up to this point, and then he got burned and all that. And then he's like, oh God, I got to cover it up. And then he's dead and then it's over. It was obviously supposed to stretch out more. And while I'm talking about Michael Jonas, I want to say props to the actor. He portrays, he does something with this. Everything I just complained about is almost nullified by the character himself. He actually makes it work, even though it was missed potential. And I still think they should have kept the story arc throughout the season as it was intended. He actually portrays a character who is rushing, who is panicking, who is losing himself. As he does more and more things, it's obvious that he is actually crumbling under the stress and the pressure of the situation. And as he just gets louder and more wild in his motions, and you see his eyes, and he's just, and he can't deal with this. It's awesome the way he portrays it. So it actually fits in its own way, because even though it was rushed out of character, in a real life setting, it feels like it was rushed in character, and so we can go along with it because it actually makes sense. It's coherent. And then, of course, he's killed by being flung into a plasma thing, and he's vaporized. Poor guy. Anyways. Rest in peace, Jonas. God, do I have anything else to talk about? I do kind of. Let's talk just a couple. This is how little I had to talk about in this episode. Where I'm going to go. Let's talk about the lighting. I know, right? And I know, Lord knows, I'm not one to talk about lighting because, as I mentioned earlier, I don't exactly have professional lights either. Although I've been thinking about setting up a kind of a lighting situation there. The problem is room, really. Anyways, I'm going to have topic. One of the things that Star Trek especially is really bad about is they'll do this thing where you'll know they're the bad guys because they're in a cave or because it's dark. That's how you know they're the bad guys. It's there are exceptions to this. TNG and Deep Space Nine both had really noticeable exceptions to this, but it's also worth noting they were both just as guilty of this as well. And Voyager's very guilty of this. How do you know the Kazon are evil? Because everything's dark, or occasionally it's all light and blue, and it's just. I'm sorry, but can you imagine actually living on a military ship under those kind of lighting conditions? It's just kind of silly every time I see that. It's like when you're, well, I don't want to give anything away, but it's just makes me scratch my head every time I see it. Um, I also like how Seska, and I've kind of commented on this before, Seska portrays a very interesting type of character, and do not take this as a negative. I genuinely like what she does, what the actress does with her character. But the way she portrays her character is as if she's trying to be manipulative and seductive, but isn't. And I know that sounds weird, because Seska certainly is an intelligent villain, and let's face it, she is pretty much the only villain, the only decent villain Voyager had up until, well, quite a while actually. So yeah, I'm not saying anything negative about it, but my point is, it's like she keeps trying to do the, I'm on your side and maybe we can work together. And she does that kind of grin thing she does so well. But at no point in time does she come off as charismatic or enticing or anything like that. Rather, I get the feeling much more that she is like well, I hate to put it in such terms because I hate spiders, but she's like the Black Widow that already has you in its web, and now she's just playing with you before she does her thing. And I like that because it says so much about her character, and it is indeed a very thing, not only a Seska thing, but it's a very Cardassian mindset to have, all things considered. That, everything around her and everything she's dealing with are basically just tools to be utilized and then discarded for whatever it is she cares about. And there are things she does care about. She does show on many occasions she cares about her child. Again, a very Cardassian thing, I might add. Cardassians are huge on family. She cares about her personal power base. She cares about, getting revenge on Janeway in specific and dealing with Chakotay in specific, blah, 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 blah. There are things she cares about, but she's always portraying herself as this thing where everything else is just something that she can have fun with before she deals with them. And so I like her portrayal of that, especially in this episode. I got one last note on here. God, I got nothing. I just have no notes on this episode. I'm sorry. One last note on this episode I want to comment on before I move on here. There's a scene structure, is really, because it's a set of scenes, where Tom, discovers that Michael Jonas is the guy. And this is kind of screwed up because we, the viewers, already know Michael Jonas is the traitor. I hate myself for saying this, but I kind of wish they had never shown us Michael Jonas was the traitor. By all means, keep the character. By all means, because he's a great actor and he does a great job with the role. Keep him as a regular. Introduce other regulars at the same time, like Hogan, for example. Hogan should have had more of a role. You should have had more characters that we could have chosen from, so it's at least a question as to who the traitor is, rather than we know it's Jonas because we've seen him talking with Seska and the Kazons. So there's no suspense, there's no tension there. And having Tom fiddle with the thing would have been a great reveal moment if we hadn't already known it was Jonas. But then it gets even weirder because then Tom is, flying back to the ship and he's under attack and all that stuff. And he has this great line, which I actually bothered to wrote down. I can take care of myself, just get Voyager to safety. Again, Tom Paris, ladies and gentlemen. But why was the very first thing out of his mouth not, it's Jonas, it's Michael Jonas? Why keep that little nugget to himself? And as an aside, I just have to comment. I know this is the Trekker in me speaking, but every time it's done kind of where someone just kind of locks out the crew and manages to overpower the crew. This will happen several more times in Voyager as Voyager goes on. Every time someone just manages to overpower and outthink and outwit all the members of the crew of a military Federation starship, and don't give me that, it's a military ship, I just kind of roll my eyes a little bit at like, what is wrong with you people? These people wouldn't get away with this thing in my old office back when I actually worked at Net Standard, let alone on a freaking military ship. And so seeing Jonas just completely overthrow everything, and like, for example, let me just give you just one example. Beam Jonas out of there. Okay. They beam his comm badge away because they're retarded. Now, we do know that that's how they usually track people on the ship, even though we have shown many, many, many times that they don't need that to do it, that they can just scan for life forms. So them beaming the comm badge off made sense. But the next step would immediately have been, oh, well, let's just find Jonas because there's only 2 life forms in engineering, and one of them's Talaxian. But no, they're just an idiot. Oh, I just got a comm badge. I'm apparently 3 years old. And the funny thing is I could already think of a way, as a writer, to get around that. All you'd have to do is erect a proper array of force fields to block beaming. That is something that is well known within the show. He actually does erect a force field just to make it so people can't get in. But no, they just have to oh god, and then there's just a lot of little niggling details in this episode that don't make sense and feel like they were just flung out there to get the episode keep going. And that is my problem with this episode in a nutshell. Rather than doing anything, with the exception of the 2 things I talked about, the Tom Paris examination and the Doctor beginning of his plotline, other than those 2 exceptions, this whole episode was just people trying to get to the episode. They just wanted to get it over with. That's what the whole episode feels like. They didn't care about doing a decent episode. They didn't care about doing a decent show. They were just trying to crank out this episode so they can work on the next one. And I hate it when people do that. Just to kind of defend myself here, I have been accused once ever of doing that exact same thing myself, just trying to cram the episodes out to keep up my schedule. And Lord knows I do try to keep up my schedule. But this exact episode, I had so little to talk about. I went and watched several behind-the-scenes things for Season 2 in general. I watched an interview that happened with TV Guide some time ago. I read all the interview stuff I could find. I did everything I could to get more information on this episode, and I am sorry for doing a short episode, but that's the episode. I kind of already have talked about my changes, so I don't really have anything else to add there. Did I like it then? Do I like it now? I think I'm going to keep doing that section, even when I do other shows. Did I like it then? No. I thought it was kind of retarded then. Do I like it now? No. I mean, it's not a bad episode. It's just an episode. It's 45 minutes of time burnt. And that's unfortunately all I have to say about it. So I'll see you later.